Hey everyone, welcome to our video lesson on data displays part 2. In this video we are going to go over frequency tables and frequency histograms along with what the difference is between a frequency table and a cumulative frequency table. So grab your notebook, something to write with, definitely going to want your calculator on hand today, and let's jump into it. So the first thing we're going to go over is a frequency table. All right, now I have a data set here with a frequency table completely filled in. The following table represents the scores earned on a recent multiple choice test. All right, so let's say that this was an all multiple choice test. Every question was worth 5 points, and that's why you'll notice the scores go down in 5-point increments, and there's nothing like a 97 or an 82 on there. Okay, now this is still univariate data. I'm only measuring one variable. I'm measuring the scores on their test. But now we have two columns of numbers, one to represent the scores on the test and one to represent the frequency of that score in our data set. All right, so what this means is that there was one person who got a score of 100. There were two people who got a score of 95. One person got a 90, 3 people got an 85, and so on. Frequency is just measuring how many times does that number come up within our data set. Okay? Now, if you notice that you have a frequency table, again, recognize that it is still a univariate data set. You're measuring that one score. But it's a little bit more complicated when it comes to finding some of our values that we've used to summarize data in the past. For example, if I want to find my mean or my average test score, I'm not just simply going to list all of these numbers in my calculator and pull up the one var stats. I need to take into consideration that there was only one 100, but there were two 95s and there were 5 80s. So I'm going to show you guys how to input a frequency table into your calculator. One slight difference when you're doing that. But I do want to point out that the easiest thing to find when you're looking at a frequency table is the mode. Which data value happened the most often? Well, the data value that has the highest frequency is going to be the one that showed up the most in our set. So if I scan my frequency list here, I see the number 5 as our highest value, and that matches up with a score of an 80. So my mode would have been an 80 on this test. All right, now mean, median, standard deviations, those are a little bit harder to figure out. What you could do is you could kind of pull out the information from this table and make your own list and deal with it the exact same way we dealt with it last week. You can make a list of 100 and then a 95, 95, write it twice, and then a 90, and then write 85 3 times, and then write 85 times, and you can drag out that list. Or our calculators are smart enough to understand what a frequency table looks like. So I'm going to go into Stat, Edit. I'm going to put all of my scores into list 1. So I have 100, 95, 90. All the way to 65, and then I'm going to shift to the right 1 so that my cursor is now in list 2, and I'm going to input all the frequencies. Be careful, make sure that they line up correctly. 100 went with 1, and then 2, 1, 3, 5, 3, 2, 2. And I should have even lists, and they should all match up exactly like they do in our table. So now when I go to Stat Calc and I hit this one var stats, which is the menu that's going to show me all of those critical values like mean and standard deviation, I want to make sure that not only does this say L1 next to my list, but the next line says freq list. And that FREQ stands for frequency. So the frequency list is going to be L2. Now I'm willing to bet that most of you guys don't have that L2 in there. Yours is blank. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose a list. We're going to go to second and then hit the stat button because you'll see the word list written in blue above it. And then I'm going to choose L2 because that's the list where I put all my frequencies. So hit enter and then go down to calculate. Okay, and you have to kind of trust me on this one unless you do your own investigative work. This is the mean, this is the standard deviation, and this is our quartiles and our medians for that data set. And it does take into consideration how many people scored 100, how many people scored a 70, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer our answers over here to our notebook. You should do the same with your calculator. All right, now the only one I left blank here was the total. We haven't looked at that value on the calculator yet. It is the letter N for number of values, but you could also find that total by simply adding up all the frequencies, and you would get that there were 19 scores recorded in this data set. Your mean should be 80.5. I rounded to the nearest tenth. Your median was an 80. Your mode we knew was an 80. So all of those central tendencies, all very similar. That tells me that my scores were probably very balanced and symmetrical. The standard deviation, I rounded to the nearest hundredth, and your IQR, remember that's Q3 minus Q1. And if you look at your Q3 and Q1 and subtract, you get 10. So that's a frequency table. That's a couple of things that we can do with a frequency table using the assistance of our calculator. But a lot of times what they're going to ask you to do is they're going to ask you to create the frequency table and create what's called a frequency histogram. So that's our next section of the notes. Now, I'm not going to require you to write down all of these temperatures because there are 30 numbers in this list. So if you do not want to write down all these numbers and you just kind of want to listen along, please make sure that you get a frequency table and a histogram set up down first. Okay, now in our first example of a frequency table, it was pretty easy to read because the scores were only going down by 5 points at a time. So we could literally list every individual possible score and then count up the number of people that scored that value. In this, because there's a lot more variety and there's so many different temperatures ranging over the last 30 days in New York, what they'll do with a frequency table, and one of the benefits of a frequency table is instead of having individual temperatures listed, we can actually do temperature ranges, and then we can split our data into specific categories and measure the frequency of the numbers that fit into that category. All right, so I did a little bit of thinking ahead of time, obviously, as I'm making this lesson. But what you want to do is you want to kind of look at your data set. You want to find the lowest and the highest value. What are the numbers you're working in between? And then you want to think what would be a reasonable break off to kind of divide this data set. Should you have sections of 10-degree temperatures? Should you have sections of 2-degree temperatures, 20-degree temperatures? It all depends on what your variability is in your data set. When I did a little brainstorming, I recognized that, okay, if we count by every 5 degrees, we'll have enough categories to look at, and then we'll also have small enough categories to kind of get an idea of what's been going on in New York. So I started with the lowest temperature, which is 40 degrees, and I brought that category up to 44. I can't talk and write at the same time. So that's 40 degrees to 44 degrees. My next category would then start at 45 degrees, because we don't have any half degrees here, and go up to 49 degrees. And these are just the sections that I've decided to use in my frequency table. Sometimes these sections will be given to you. A lot of the times it is your choice to make them however you would like. And I know from looking at my set that all of these numbers are going to cover my entire range of data. All right, so now that I have my specific categories, what you want to do is you want to organize all of these numbers into their specific categories. And that you can do in whatever way makes the most sense to you. Some people like to go by the first category, 40 to 44, and they're going to skim and they're going to cross off the ones that fit, and they're going to count up how many there are, and then they're going to write the frequency in there. And then they move on to the next category. Some people like to take the data set one by one, and they're going to take the 60 and they're going to make a little mark in the category that it fits, and then they move on to the next value and they make mark where that category fits, and then by the time they're done with their entire data set, they just count up all their marks and they give themselves a frequency. You got to figure out what works for you, what makes the most sense, but do me a favor right now, pause the video and try to get all of these data values into their categories, and we'll see if we get these same answers. So when I took the time to organize them all, these are my frequencies for each category. One little hint for you guys, once you're done transferring all the data into your frequency table, Check to make sure that you've counted all of the data values. Just by adding up all of the frequencies, you can get the total number of values that you put in your table, and hopefully it should match up with the total number of values that they gave you. I added all mine together and I got 30, and that makes sense because they told me they were the temperatures for the past 30 days. Okay, so that's a frequency table. I could go ahead and put that into my calculator. The issue here, though, is that how do you put something like 40-44 into your calculator? So this is where we get one of the kind of downfalls of frequency tables. It's nice that we can have ranges and that we can organize large sets of data into more specific categories, but then that's also a kind of downfall because now I can't figure out specific means, specific standard deviations, because when I say that there are 4 temperatures between 40 and 44 degrees, well, are all 4 of them 40 degrees, or are all 4 of them 44 degrees? Or are they 40, 41, 42, 43? I don't know. All right, so unfortunately, that's where our frequency tables can cause a bit of an issue, but they have so many other benefits. And one of the other benefits is that we can then transform this information into what's called a frequency histogram. Okay, a histogram is another display that we can use to visualize our data and make inferences based on what we see. And it's more of a graph than it is a table. This is a frequency table. This is more of a graph. And you're going to start with an L shape because I'm only working with positive temperatures and positive frequencies. But my bottom is going to be the categories of temperatures. So I'm just going to label that. And then my left-hand side is going to be the frequencies. Okay, I'm going to use a different color so that we can get a better idea. So when it comes down here to the temperatures, I want to copy down all of my categories that I used, and they're going to be completely touching one another. So I'm going to just use little segments here. This is going to represent 40 through 44. The next section is going to represent 45 through 49. And so on and so forth. I'll label those out. And then up on the top, you want to make sure you have enough spaces to fill your highest frequency, which is 8. So if I count my lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I have just one more space. But instead of squeezing it in, I'm just going to count by 2s instead. So this is going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so on. Okay, so I went ahead and I filled in the rest of my x-axis with all of our categories from our frequency table. And now to create a frequency histogram, all we're going to do is we're going to create the bars, and each bar is going to have the height of the frequency that goes along with that category. So 40 to 44 degrees, there were 4 temperatures in that section. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to the 4. I'm going to go over to the end of that category, and then some people like to, give it a little depth, maybe shade it in, give it dots, give it swirlies. That's where you get to be creative. You can use different colors, but I usually just generally tend to the same color. The next category, 45 to 49, gets 5 temperatures, so right in the middle of 6 and 4. I'm going to come up from the last bar I just built down to the category's end. And that's our next bar of our histogram. And then you continue to build, and pause the video now and try it out yourself. So that is my completed histogram. Okay, now hand in hand with the frequency tables, the good thing about frequency histograms is we can very easily see the distribution, whether everything is all clumped up on one side or if it's relatively normal or symmetrical. We can see where the mode is, or what temperatures happen the most often. But then the downfalls are that we will not be able to tell very specific things like standard deviation and mean, because within this bar of the histogram, I don't know where the temperatures exactly fall between the categories of 60 and 64. All right, but I can tell how many temperatures there were in total by just adding up my frequencies or the heights of the bars, just like I would from the table. The last thing that I just want to quickly go through, doesn't come up as often, but I want you guys to have a heads up for it in case it does, is a cumulative frequency. And just like if I gave you a cumulative exam at the end of the year, it would include everything we learned up to that point. So a cumulative frequency is the sum of all frequencies up to a certain value. And I picked a data set that I thought you guys would relate to, the number of text messages sent in one day by students, the number numbers, if I asked you guys specifically now, would probably be a lot higher, since one of the main reasons one of the main ways we're communicating with each other is via text message. But these are the numbers from last year. So we could create a frequency table and a frequency histogram like we did on the last page, where I categorize my text messages into specific intervals. But sometimes they'll ask for a cumulative frequency histogram or a cumulative frequency table. And what that means is that you are going to section them off, but instead of going from 0 to 9 and then starting the next category at 10, you're going to go from 0 to 9, and then from 0 to a new thing, and then from 0 to a new thing. And I showed you guys that here on the table, okay? Because we don't just want to know what's happening with messages, how many people are sending messages from 0 to 9. Once we expand that interval, we want to know how many people are sending that number of messages in total, all the way up to this value 19. So similar idea. You want to go through your data set. You want to find how many fit between 0 and 9, and then how many fit between 0 and 19. One shortcut for that is, once you know how many people fit in between 0 and 9, you're just going to take that number and add on to it all the people who fit between 10 and 19, the new numbers introduced in this category. And then I would take that number and I would add on to it all the people that fit in between 20 and 29, the new numbers in the next category. And then once you have your cumulative frequency lists here, it's the same transformation over to your cumulative frequency histogram. And what you should see is, you should see gradually growing bars, because they're going to be adding on top of one another. So pause the video, try this out yourself, and we'll see if we all get the same answers. All right, so I hope you tried that out on your own, but here are my answers. I went through and I counted all of the data values that fit between 0 and 9, and I got 9 people. And then between 0 and 19 was 12, and 0 to 29 was 14, etc. And that means that the number of people who sent between 10 and 19 messages, so that not the 0 to 9 that we already counted, but the 10 to 19 that got added on here, would be 3 new people, because that was 3 more people than we had from 0 to 9. And when you're dealing with a cumulative frequency table or histogram, you'll notice that the values always continue to grow or stay the same. If you have 0 values in one category, it could stay the same, but it'll never go down. Okay, this last number in your frequency table, or the last height in your cumulative frequency histogram, that is the total number of values. Okay, and then in order to find specific sections, you would have to take into consideration, okay, this bar measures from 0 to 39, and this bar measures 0 to 29. So this space in between them represents the people who sent 30 to 39 messages. Okay, a lot of information that you can pick apart from frequency tables, frequency histograms, and cumulative frequency histograms, and there will be a practice set up tomorrow. But if you have any immediate questions, reach out to me, and otherwise I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.